mystery behind Bob Crane's murder still haunts family and friends.
During my career, I've had a lot of big cases, but the Bob Crane case tops them all.
It's one of those cases that, of all the murder cases in the Valley, this is the one that keeps coming back.
This Crane case seems to have taken on a life of its own.
For 5 decades, Bob Crane has been a constant presence in our lives. The wisecracking Colonel Hogan adored by millions. And his unsolved murder continues to fascinate.
I've read about all this stuff. It's weird to finally touch it.
The physical evidence in the case still preserved in these 11 boxes in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. It's like opening a time capsule. Bob Crane's fingerprints taken in the morgue, his TWA luggage tag, and the keys to his Scottsdale apartment.
Bob Crane's blood.
It is.
Taken at his autopsy.
It was on June 30th, 1978.
Still in liquid form.
Yeah, appears to be. Yes, it is.
Okay, so this stuff basically hasn't been touched or seen in 20 years, right?
No, it hasn't.
Are we even fortunate this exists?
Yes.
This memo from November of 2002 ordered that the evidence be destroyed.
Can you explain why it wasn't destroyed?
No.
So we lucked out.
We did.
Back then, you needed a huge amount of blood and, sample to be able to determine DNA. Now it takes so little with the new sciences. We may be able to really, figure this thing out.
We will retest the DNA contained in these vials and try to unlock the mystery of who killed Bob Crane.
What will this evidence tell us? As a prosecutor, I'm not afraid of the truth.
We will send the DNA to one of the top labs in the nation. In June of 1978, Bob Crane was performing in dinner theaters across the country, still riding the popularity of Hogan's Heroes. But privately, Crane was obsessed with a lurid hobby that consumed him, videotaping his many sexual encounters with women.
This all-American image of him, of my dad as Colonel Hogan, has the dark side. Colonel Hogan isn't who we thought he was.
John Carpenter, a home video salesman from Los Angeles, met Crane on the set of Hogan's and introduced him to this new technology.
Carpenter liked being in the limelight. He liked the benefit of having women that he would never have the opportunity to get, a hanger-on.
Carpenter often met up with Crane out on the road. The two would pick up women and videotape their sexual exploits.
It became kind of a hobby that went too far. I think their friendship really revolved around electronics and women.
In June of 1978, Crane was performing in Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater in Scottsdale. Carpenter met up with him, but instead of staying with Crane as he had in the past, Crane booked him in a hotel room down the street.
Towards the end of my dad's life, he was definitely pulling away from John Carpenter.
Weeks before his death, Crane told his son he was tired of Carpenter hanging around.
John Carpenter's a pain in the ass. I'm making changes.
Police believe Crane was severing his relationship with Carpenter, and Carpenter was angry. Crane was reflecting on his life as heard in this final interview with Cool Radio 6 days before his murder.
But I have no regrets in any of my life at this point. No. You can't look backwards. No. And the terrible thing is I'll be 50 in 2 weeks. I want to go out swinging, as they say.
Bob Crane never made it to his 50th birthday.
In the early morning hours of June 29th, 1978, while Bob Crane was asleep inside the Winfield Apartments, someone entered his bedroom and bludgeoned him to death.
This never-before-seen video taken by Scottsdale police inside Crane's apartment as a medical examiner shaves Crane's battered head for a closer look at the fatal wound.
Well, we got 2 blows here. They're very definitely 2 blows on this.
An electrical cord cut from a video camera was found tied around Crane's neck. There was no sign of forced entry.
My theory is that Crane let him in the apartment.
There was no sign of a struggle. Suspicions quickly turned to John Carpenter.
You have the right to the presence of an attorney. Do you understand these rights?
I understand the rights the way you read them.
John Carpenter's first interview with police, never before heard by the public.
My question to you is that prior to an agreement on these rights here, what I was under the impression, correct me if I'm wrong before I make my statement to you, that I was coming here to help you out, not put me in. and I'm really very apprehensive about this.
The morning of the murder, Carpenter flew back to L.A. The plan was for Bob Crane to drive him to the airport, as clearly noted in Crane's blood-spattered day planner by his bedside. John leaves, 10 a.m. Instead, Carpenter took a cab. Why the sudden change in plans? He even laid out items he planned to give Carpenter that morning. Carpenter's swim trunks, unclaimed, still in evidence. At the time Crane's body was discovered, before the outside world knew he was dead, John Carpenter made several suspicious phone calls back to Scottsdale.
And he called the Windmill Dinner Theater at a time where he knew Crane wouldn't even be there. It was very unusual for Carpenter to start calling around town looking for Crane and asking people if they had seen him.
He even called Bob Crane's son.
I'm back in town. Let me know if you need anything. And we're on the phone for 30 seconds. I hang up. I do one of those, where you almost look at the phone. Why did he just call me? The trip's over. Why would he call me?
Highly unusual.
Highly unusual.
Suspicious.
Suspicious.
Carpenter called Bob Crane's apartment twice. A detective answered.
This, in your mind, is a classic of a guilty person returning to the crime scene, telephonically.
Absolutely.
Carpenter never asked why police were in Crane's apartment because police say he knew the answer. Next, John Carpenter becomes the main suspect when blood is discovered in his rental car.
How did that blood sample get on Carpenter's door if it's not my dad's blood? Naturally, who is it? How did it get there?
38 years later, can DNA science finally identify who killed Bob Crane?
On the afternoon of June 29, 1978, actor Bob Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his Scottsdale apartment. That morning, his close friend John Carpenter, one of the last people to see him alive, hastily left Scottsdale and flew back to Los Angeles. But before he left, he returned his rental car, a brand new 1978 Chrysler Cordoba. And when Scottsdale police searched it, they made a shocking discovery.
Police find 7 bloodstains on the inside passenger door of John Carpenter's rental car. The car was immediately impounded by DPS, processed and photographed, the blood collected to determine blood type.
You're talking about a case that was in 1978 where blood typing was it. That's all you could do with blood.
DNA testing was still 10 years away. Police questioned Carpenter about the blood.
You shook me up with the blood on my car, which, like I said, I didn't know where that came from, and I don't know how much there was. Then when you said to me, why did I kill Bob Crane? Well, I told you right off the start I didn't, and I would never do that.
And this is the actually tube from Carpenter's blood.
That is John Carpenter's blood.
It is.
Taken when?
On 7/2 of 1978.
Still liquid.
It is.
Police need to know whose blood is in the car. Is it John Carpenter's or Bob Crane's? If it's Crane's blood, Carpenter may very well be the killer.
You're going to have some real explaining to do. And he said, yeah, whatever.
Borkenhagen fingerprinted Carpenter that day, the originals still in evidence, signed by John Carpenter.
July 2nd, 1978.
This is John Carpenter's prints as given to Dennis Borkenhagen, one of the investigators from Scottsdale PD.
They are.
Exactly as they were.
Yes.
Borkenhagen is one of only 3 people who ever questioned Carpenter.
What were your impressions of the guy?
He was very stoic.
You implied and directly told me that I had direct contact with Bob Crane's death.
Yes. In fact, we'll get to that.
The first time I talked to him, I knew we were dealing with a guy that was going to be hard to crack.
Did you feel he was lying to you?
Oh, yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
You felt he was deceptive?
Yeah.
Lab results on the blood in Carpenter's car reveal it's type B, the same blood type as Bob Crane, found in only 9% of the population. There's more. Type B blood found on the drapes in Crane's guest room. Did the killer peer out the window to time his escape? And type B blood on the front door, leading out of Crane's apartment. While the blood is of the same type as Bob Crane, in 1978, before DNA, there's no way to prove it actually came from Bob Crane. With no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, prosecutors need a confession. Scottsdale Police Lieutenant Ron Dean and Detective Borkenhagen confront Carpenter a second time, never before heard.
We're trying
trying to talk to you about the murder of Bob Crane.
This I
that occurred in
understand.
Scottsdale.
This I understand.
And what do you think about that?
I think it's a great, but when you sit across from me and accuse me of killing my best friend, one of my best friends.
Well, I'm still thinking
I-
that you did.
All right, then fine. Then
In
I
fact,
won't say.
I think I would be able to probably prove that
Then
you
fine.
did.
Then I'm not going to say another word. I'm sorry.
Well, I
I'm
don't know
here.
if you should say another word or not.
Then I'm sorry.
What do you mean you're sorry? You're sorry you killed him? Are you? Or do you think you deserved it? Why don't you tell me about that? Let's get right to it. I think you're about ready to tell us about it, and let's get right with it. What happened in Scottsdale, Arizona to cause you to kill Bob Crane?
It's the last time investigators would question John Carpenter. He walked out of the interview a free man. 14 years would pass before he was finally charged with the crime. Hidden from public view for 22 years, these are the original sections of the passenger door of John Carpenter's rental car. The missing pieces are where the blood was found. The cutouts were tested 4 separate times in the late 80s and early 90s for DNA.
None of them were able to conclusively say that it was Bob Crane's blood.
The cutouts stored for years in these sealed vials are what we will test at Bodie Cellmark Forensics in Maryland, the same lab that performed DNA testing in several high-profile murder cases: O.J. Simpson, JonBenet Ramsey, and Bob Crane. Investigator Mike Meislich with the County Attorney's Office will package all the blood evidence.
You are going to package it up and send it off.
Yes, that's
Just
correct.
as you would in any case.
Yes.
Nobody's touched it. It hasn't been tampered with.
No. So we've got some evidence that they may be able to do something with technology these days.
With the advancements in DNA science in the past 20 years, will our tests finally reveal who killed Bob Crane? Next, John Carpenter goes on trial.
There is no doubt in your mind that John Carpenter killed Bob Crane.
None whatsoever.
But the jury has doubts.
The evidence wasn't there.
And what will our new DNA tests reveal? Within days of Bob Crane's murder, police believe the killer is his close friend John Carpenter. They think Carpenter flew into a rage because Crane was about to end their friendship. The strongest evidence, blood, found in Carpenter's rental car matching Bob Crane's blood type. But 2 county attorneys thought the evidence was weak, and they refused to put Carpenter on trial. 12 years had passed.
Look, I'm not here to criticize the 1978 investigation. Would I have done it differently? Would it have been done differently today? Absolutely.
How frustrating was it that you felt you had identified the killer and nothing was happening?
It was very, very frustrating in the beginning. It was very hard to take in the beginning.
In 1990, newly elected County Attorney Rick Romley reopened the Crane case.
A lot of years had gone by, which had complicated the case. We had lost evidence.
He brought in Detective Jim Raines to take a fresh look.
And I knew I had to go back and treat it as if it happened yesterday.
Detectives Raines and Vassell started from scratch.
We re-interviewed everybody involved in this case. We tracked down each and every person. We just basically eliminated everybody else on the planet.
All roads lead to John Carpenter.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
No doubt.
The investigation uncovered new clues. The crime scene photos of a V-shaped blood stain on Crane's bed helped detectives finally identify a murder weapon, a camera tripod.
And he laid the tripod over the bloody sheet, and the tripod from the first nubs that you tighten up for the legs to the top of the tripod was the identical length of the blood stain on the sheet.
The wounds to Bob Crane's head matched perfectly with the tripod's steel mounting plate. The tripod seen in this photograph was missing from Crane's apartment. Investigators believe Carpenter fled the murder scene and placed the bloody tripod in the front passenger seat of his rental car, depositing the blood on the door. They also discover what they believe is a smoking gun, a crime scene photograph previously overlooked of John Carpenter's rental car. It reveals a tiny red speck that pathologists determined was tissue from Bob Crane's battered skull. The actual sample, though, was either lost or never collected.
You believe in your heart of hearts John Carpenter killed Bob Crane?
Absolutely.
No doubt.
No doubt.
When you put it all together, blood, the tissue, it had to be him. There's no other possibility.
Authorities in Torrance, California this morning arrested John Henry Carpenter while he was on his way to work.
Carpenter is arrested and charged with Bob Crane's murder. In 1994, 16 years after the killing, John Carpenter finally goes on trial. DNA science was in its infancy. Testing of the blood on Carpenter's rental car was inconclusive. Prosecutors could not prove the blood came from Bob Crane.
How big of a deal was that to you guys?
That was a big deal because it was the most crucial piece of evidence that they could have given us.
Michael Lake was the jury foreman.
If we had DNA from that car, he would have been found guilty. I'm 100% positive.
Without a DNA match, the jury found Carpenter
not guilty of murder in the first degree. Signed, foreperson, Michael E. Lake.
But they wanted the DNA. I mean, that's, in the end, we didn't have sufficient evidence to be able to get a guilty verdict.
When he was acquitted, how did you feel that day?
Just disgusted.
The justice system let the person walk.
My life is back together again after 16 years, and I'm sorry for breaking down, but it's a lot of weight off of me.
Carpenter never took the stand. A cloud of suspicion haunted him until his death 4 years later and continues to this day. 38 years after the murder of Bob Crane, we retest the DNA evidence in the case using modern DNA science. Will it prove John Carpenter was the killer?
What it may do more than anything else is verify what everybody thought all along, is he's the one that did it.
Coming up next, the results of our DNA tests in the Bob Crane murder.
Is it possible you guys chased the wrong guy for 40 years?
Sure, if it's somebody else's blood. If it's not Crane's DNA, yeah, then, you know, we do have the wrong guy.
Everything points to John Carpenter, yet there's still a nervousness. It's just, I guess it's the nature of being a prosecutor. You know, there's no absolute certainties in this world.
Will modern DNA science prove John Carpenter killed actor Bob Crane in 1978? If the blood found in John Carpenter's car is from Bob Crane, Carpenter is almost certainly the killer. There is no other plausible explanation.
So if they find this is Bob Crane's DNA in that blood, case closed.
Case closed.
How much do you trust the science?
1,000%.
If it's not your dad's blood, if it's type B from somebody else, then cops maybe spent 3 decades looking at the wrong guy.
I know. Oh my God. Yeah, that'd be like an earthquake to me.
And welcome back. The moment of truth in the Bob Crane case, and I'm joined tonight by 5 people who have lived and breathed this case for 30 years. Bob Crane's son, Bob Jr., is with us tonight. Rick Romley, the county attorney who prosecuted John Carpenter. Michael Lake was the foreman of the jury, and Barry Vassal, who investigated this case from Scottsdale PD for years. And we're also joined tonight by Stephen Avila, who is John Carpenter's attorney in Oakland, California tonight. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Several jurors have told me that if they had DNA in 1994 that proved that the blood in John Carpenter's rental car came from Bob Crane, they would have convicted John Carpenter, no question about it. True, Michael?
That's true.
DNA tests at the time were inconclusive. 22 years later, we have retested those same samples from Carpenter's car at Bodie Cellmark Forensics using the latest DNA science, and this time around, we got a result. We got a result. And tonight, for the first time, we are revealing those results to the world. The DNA found on the door of John Carpenter's rental car is not from Bob Crane. The tests actually picked up 2 DNA profiles. A major contributor is from a man. His identity is unknown. Second DNA profile is a partial profile, too degraded to reach any conclusions. This is an explosive development. I think we all went into this expecting this was going to come back John Carpenter as the guilty man. Bob Crane's blood in your father's car. Case closed.
Shocking.
What do you make of this?
I'm shocked right now. There were always 2 people in my mind, John Carpenter or my stepmother, for different reasons. But it was on John's car.
I think we're all frankly stunned. Stephen Avila in Oakland tonight, you have said from the very beginning that police had the wrong guy, that your client did not kill Bob Crane.
And the reason I said that is I took an objective view of the evidence that we had at that time. I knew my client, and I stated from day one he did not kill Bob Crane. This is wonderful news for his family. This is wonderful news for John, who has passed away, to know that he's finally been vindicated, not only in a court of law, but in a court of public opinion. He was vilified for so many years unfairly, and the evidence in this case was ignored, which led to his prosecution.
Let me stop you.
District attorneys did not prosecute this case.
Let me turn to Barry Vassell, who knows DNA evidence well. Is there any possible way we're missing something here?
There's a possibility that the sample that was collected and tested was not part of the evidence that we had on the door panel back in 1978. That door panel and that evidence was tested over and over and over again and basically washed clean.
Could have washed away the original blood and that there's nothing left, but wouldn't we get something from Bob Crane in that sample?
I don't believe so, not the way that it was tested in the past.
It does not change your mind?
Not at all.
Rick Romley, you prosecuted the case. If you had this evidence in 1994, would you have gone forward with prosecuting John Carpenter if you had what we had tonight?
It's a bit of a Hobson choice because information had come to me that John Carpenter was quite ill, and the family I felt that they had an obligation that we bring somebody to trial, and all the other evidence was all pointing to John Carpenter. So I may still have brought the case because all of the other evidence, all of the motive was still there. But following up on the question that went to Barry as well on the evidence, we had two profiles. One was not Bob Crane, but one was inconclusive.
Right.
And as I had mentioned to you some time ago, that my concern was even back then, because we had such trouble with, gathering up all of the evidence. I mean, DPS had lost the car.
Right, Department of Public Safety.
The Department of Public Safety. And we had to, I think it was New Mexico, we had to go back and find the car.
So you think there's
a possibility that the blood that was there could be contaminated. It wasn't preserved right, and that inconclusive part could have been it. No excuses.
Let me ask Michael Lake. Michael, you guys rendered a verdict. You and I talked about this months ago. I think, again, we felt if we got a sample, it was going to be Bob Crane's blood in John Carpenter's rental car, case closed. I think we both thought that. I think a lot of us thought that. Stephen didn't, but the rest of us might have. How do you feel about your verdict now, 22 years later?
I agree with them. It still could be
You still think
contaminated.
John Carpenter did it?
Yes, I do.
Even despite what we've found in this test?
Yeah, it could be contaminated, like they were saying.
You are doubting the evidence, the DNA evidence.
Yes, sir.
Stephen Avila, we've got some doubters here on the DNA.
Look, I've done so many homicide cases which DNA plays such a prominent role. We've learned to accept the results of the DNA test. We've learned it as defense lawyers. Prosecutors have learned at it. To come forward now with this conjecture that somehow it's contaminated with absolutely no proof of it is just outrageous. At one point, do we stop saying that a man who didn't kill his best friend did not kill him?
You said after the trial that the killer, the real killer, is still out there. Do you believe that?
I believe the real killer was a woman. They are just ignoring common sense in this entire prosecution and the entire case itself. What you have is a situation which lends itself to one conclusion and one conclusion only. Mr. Crane knew this person who came into his apartment. He had sex with her. There's evidence of sexual intercourse with somebody, and it was a woman, and they ignored it. The last person with him was a woman who was not properly interrogated.
Barry, let me hold off there. Barry, you investigated this case from the beginning. You think Carpenter was let into the apartment by Bob Crane that night?
Yes, absolutely.
And then Crane went to sleep, being comfortable with the person in that apartment.
Yes.
And you believe John Carpenter bludgeoned him?
Yes, I do.
No doubt.
No doubt.
This doesn't change that for you?
No, not at all.
And you told me you'd feel that way, regardless of how this all came out. Bob Crane Jr., I know you're stunned. You're sitting there. I know. I think a lot of us are stunned. I think we expected it to go a certain way. I think we went into it thinking that.
What do you make of this as you're hearing this? The idea that it might have been a woman, someone else, that may be unknown to us.
It makes sense. I mean, John Carpenter's always been number one in my mind. As I mentioned earlier, my stepmother, Patty, number two, they were going through brutal divorce. She gained all the estate, you know, wasn't huge, but nice. No one else gained anything from it except Patty. And I agree with everyone. It was somebody that he was comfortable with. He went to bed. He would not have gone to bed with someone.
A stranger or somebody.
A stranger.
Yeah,
There's
right.
no break-in. There's no violence in the apartment that I know of, outside of the actual murder. Nothing got tossed.
Michael Lake, take me in the jury room real quick. When you guys were deliberating, you told me that everybody on that jury, and Stephen, you may find this interesting, everybody on that jury pretty much thought Carpenter did it. But you did not have DNA. That was the key. No DNA to positively say the blood in his car was from Bob Crane. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the only evidence that they had.
But in your gut, you felt Carpenter was a guy.
Yes.
Barry, we're hearing this over and over, yet our tests, and we tested exactly what you guys tested in '94, the same two samples. One of the samples we got nothing off of. The blood had been completely washed off it. We got a hit on this second sample. You're doubting it. You're doubting the science, I know.
I do. Mostly because I didn't have custody of the evidence from the beginning to the end. I wasn't able to watch how the evidence was handled when it was tested in all the various locations that it went to.
Stephen, you're hearing this. Final thought.
My final thought is that Mr. Lake and the jurors did the proper thing. They followed their oath. They said, before we convict anybody who's presumed innocent of a crime of this magnitude, we need real evidence. And what I'm hearing here today is that with the evidence that you have now produced, which was not available to me back when I tried the case, you have conclusive evidence that that blood in the car was not Mr. Crane's. And I'm hearing people say that in spite of that, they still would have brought this case. There's something wrong with that attitude.
Stephen, thank you.
We have to respect the system, and the system here is that the jury did their duty for an innocent man.
I want to end with you, Bob Jr., because I came to you a year and a half ago, hoping to put some closure on this case. We get this result tonight. Are you still glad we did it?
Absolutely. I applaud you and your crew, all the work you guys have done, everybody that you've gathered on tape and here and on screen. You've done your job. You've done great work.
If the county attorney gives us a go-ahead, we are going to put this DNA into CODIS. There's not much left of it, but we are going to try to figure out whose DNA this is that we found in that sample. In the end, we went into this with a very earnest effort to try to find the truth. The science is what the science is, and as a journalist, we report it to you, no holds barred. We're giving you what we got. We cannot control the outcome. This is what the science tells us. And I think it only deepens the mystery into who killed Bob Crane. We're going to continue this discussion tonight on our YouTube channel, Fox 10 News Now. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.